Hello everyone and welcome to the Hedge School of Farming. So this is Talamh Bio's presentations. Today we have another core member, Thomas O'Connor from Manna Organics down there in Tralee, and Thomas will tell us more where exactly he is, but welcome Thomas.
Thank you very much, Breda.
All right, yeah. So I visited Thomas a few weeks ago and I was very inspired by his knowledge in mushrooms, and I asked him to do a presentation today for us all. So I'll hand you over to Thomas now, get started. Welcome, Thomas. You can tell us a little more about who you are.
Well, my name is Thomas O'Connor. I'm from. I checked. Did my screen come up there yet? Yeah.
Not yet, no.
Presentation. Okay, give me 2 seconds there. You might have to cut this.
What's the name of the valley you're from again, Thomas?
Glonagalton Camp, the Valley of the Mad.
Glonagalt, yeah.
Camp. Is that coming up there now for you?
That's coming up now, yeah. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. So you can see there, we're from Manna Organic Farming, Glonagalton Camp. We're just on the edge of the Dingle Peninsula on the southwest coast. We're inside in a valley and we're facing out to the sea to the north, and the back of the valley is up to the south. You can just see it here. That's our farm. It's 25 acres, 13 acres of native woodland. We have 4 acres of vegetables and salads that we sell into our own shop inside in Tralee, and we have an agroforestry and a permaculture section. So we have a very mixed type of farming, and mushrooms play an integral part of that. Our journey with mushrooms started a good few years ago when I discovered a man called Paul Stamets. He's a legend when it comes to mushrooms. And I got his book, which was Mycelium Running, and it was How Mushrooms Can Save the World. What that book really focuses on is using mushrooms for bioremediation, to heal the environment from pollutants, but then also how to improve the environment for digestion of minerals and elements for the soil, and then how to help the plants communicate between each other as well. So mushrooms play a lot of roles in our environment. Unfortunately, due to industrial agriculture and monoculture of ryegrass we have around the country, the use of artificial phosphorus and all the fungicides, along with the continual ploughing, has damaged the established mycelium and mushrooms that used to be in our fields. Like if you talk to your parents, your grandparents, you could have gone out into the fields there years ago, and you would have picked all kinds of field mushrooms and bits and pieces, and there would have been no bothers. But within the last generation, if you were to talk to anybody about the mushrooms they see in the fields, they don't see them there anymore. This is a big problem because mushrooms are primary digesters. So they digest the minerals in the rocks and release those elements back to the plants. The plants photosynthesize and have sugars that they feed to the mushrooms, so they have a symbiotic relationship. The problem is when you don't have mycelium and mushrooms working in the soil, you don't have access to all those minerals elements in the soil, so we become dependent on an entirely input-dependent system. So by reintegrating mushrooms back into our landscape, we can help free ourselves from inputs by digesting the existing rock that's there. I'll play a short clip from Paul Stamets on mushrooms.
Mushroom mycelium represents rebirth, rejuvenation, regeneration. Fungi generate soil that gives life. The task that we face today is to understand the language of nature. My mission is to discover the language of nature of the fungal networks that communicate with the ecosystem. And I, in particular, believe nature is intelligent. The fact that we lack the language skills to communicate with nature does not impugn the concept that nature is intelligent. It speaks to our inadequacy of our skill set for communication. We have now learned that there are these languages that are occurring in communication between each organism. If we don't get our act together and come in commonality and understanding with the organisms that sustain us today, not only will we destroy those organisms, but we will destroy ourselves. We need to have a paradigm shift in our consciousness. What will it take to achieve that? If I die trying, but I'm inadequate to the task to make a course change in the evolution of life on this planet, okay, I tried. The fact is I tried. How many people are not trying? If you knew that every breath you took could save hundreds of lives into the future had you walked down this path of knowledge, wouldn't you run down that path of knowledge as fast as you could? I believe nature is a force of good. Good is not only a concept, it is a spirit. And so hopefully the spirit of goodness will survive.
So yeah, that's Paul Stamets, The Legend of a Man.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So he has another book which is Medicinal and Gourmet Mushrooms. If someone was interested in going a bit more depth into growing different varieties and types of mushrooms, that's a very good book. But the book I got originally off him was Mycelium Running, How Mushrooms Can Save the World. And one of the mushrooms inside in that was the garden giant. Now, I bought packets of the mycelium off of him, and I had it posted, about 3 kilos of it, and then I grew that out. So I'll just run you through the process I went with taking my garden giant from a small bit of wood chips, inoculated with the mycelium, that turned around and expanded it out, and it's called running the mycelium. If you look at the picture there, you can see just at the base of the mushrooms, you have all this white material. That's the mycelium. That's the main growing body of mushrooms that we think of, but that's actually what the living organism is. The mushroom is essentially just a fruiting body. There are lots of different other types of mushrooms that have mycelial networks that run through and benefit the soil, but they don't necessarily produce fruiting bodies. They reckon there's only around 10% of the mushrooms that we actually end up seeing mushrooms on. So mushrooms are extremely important for soil. They're extremely important for soil because they're, like I said earlier, they're primary digesters of minerals and rocks. They digest externally, so they send out acids and they break down the rocks and they feed the minerals back to the plants. But in their growing and digestion, they're not just feeding the plants because they're creating mass with their mushrooms. And as that mass breaks down, it's feeding worms and slugs and all other kinds of life inside in the soil. So we look at the garden giant. It's also known as King Saprophoria, and the wine cap mushroom. And the reason I bought this mushroom is because it's the primary digester. I wanted to introduce wood chips into between my beds where I'm growing my veg, and I wanted something to be able to break them down fairly fast. You can see it there grown in wood chips. One of the main advantages of the likes of the garden giant, a lot of mushrooms like to grow in shade or very particular environments, and they usually need sterilized medium in order to grow properly. But the beauty of the garden giant is it likes growing out in the full sunlight, so you can have it in your beds. It likes being disturbed, so if you walk in the beds or you cultivate a little bit, it doesn't make too much of a difference. And they're very good for breaking down the wood chips themselves. There's a few more pictures of them. These are the wood chips that I got inside growing inside in a box with the mycelium growing through it, and this is them growing after. So that just shows the growth cycle of the mycelium over a short period of time. And again, you can see the base root down the bottom with the mycelium. And then you can see how quickly everything starts to eat the mushroom as it starts to decay. So the beauty of the likes of the garden giant and primary digesters is they almost set up an ecological cascade. They create the environment in which all the other biology can exist. So you might have garden giants growing first as a primary digester, but then after that, you'll see loads of different types of secondary digestion mushrooms coming up through the landscape. So if you were to look at garden giants in particular, there's 3 different ways of propagating garden giants, but you can do it with other mushrooms as well. That's 1, running the mycelium. 2, bud stem regeneration. You can collect the spores, or once you have the mushrooms then in the field, you can let them grow and sporulate and grow naturally within the environment. So for running the mycelium, you can see here I bought these packs of fungi perfecti, which is Paul Stamets' website, and all they are is wood chips with sawdust that the mycelium had grown through before it went to fruit. So you can see the strings there on the left and the wood chips to the right. So I literally took those, I took boxes, I put wet cardboard on the bottom, I added wood chips, I put another layer of cardboard, and then the bags of mycelium I got from Paul, I crumbled a little bit of it up and put it on the top. I added another layer of cardboard on top of it, and then more wood chips on top of that. And what you can see then is the wood chips and the mycelium start to grow out through the cardboard because they love the corrugated material. And it spreads between the cardboard and it creates what's called a mycelial lens. And once it creates a mycelial lens, all the network is bonded together and it's extremely strong. So even though it's a thin layer, it then starts to project up into the wood chips. But because it's so strong, it's not challenged by any other bacteria or stuff inside in the soil. In fact, it stimulates the growth. So mushrooms are intelligent. By growing them, every time they meet a challenge in their environment, whether it's a bacteria or a contaminant, one string of the mycelium grows out and makes contact with it. It creates chemicals that can deal with that threat, but then it also feeds that information back through the mycelial network. So all of the parts of that network can have the same defense against the same bacteria. You can see here more pictures of it clearing on. The mycelium starts to fuzz up as it starts to run. And then that's it spreading out more again. And then this is the box of wood chips. After a while, the whole lot just becomes colonized with mycelium. So I took those 4 or 5 bags, and you can see I spread it into all of these boxes. And then from those boxes out into my field, I ended up inoculating about a ½ acre in my beds. I did that 2 years ago, and I had wood chips between the beds, and it grew up and the mushrooms spored outside. And then I turned around, and for the next 2 years, I just added wood chips after. So once the mushrooms were established in the environment, they continued going. You can see how ferocious they are. Before I was using the wooden box, and you can see what's left in the wooden box after the mycelium trying to digest it. These are them again in the end. So the other method of generating mushrooms and making copies of them is stem butt regeneration. So through evolution, the mushrooms would grow the mycelium networks out through the environment. Then they'd shoot up fruiting bodies, and the fruiting bodies were very attractive to animals, especially mammals. So the mammal would go along and it would take a bite off the top of the mushroom. It would pull the root part out, and as it was walking along and it was chewing on the mushroom, it would discard the stem butt here. But what the stem butt is extremely active. It's able to regrow. So you can cut off the bottom section here and cut it into chunks. You can lay it on your cardboard, and you can do the same actually with oyster mushrooms. This is a patch of oyster mushrooms I did. You can just cut out off the stem butt. And then what happens is that mycelium grows out and pollinates the cardboard, and that's another way of propagating it on. Now, when you take a stem butt or you run the mycelium, what you're doing is making a clone of the original plant. The other method is you can collect the spores from your mushrooms. That's easy enough done by picking off the caps, turning them upside down on a piece of paper like this, and letting the spores drop onto either the paper, or you can see here I have a bit of glass. Then you essentially use a razor, you can scrape up the spores, you put them into your container, and then you can either add that to water or you can add it into your compost brew to multiply out the population. Essentially what I did with all the 3 of those things was, this is my field, was to establish the mycelium and the garden giant growing. So now I add my straw and I add my wood chips, so I have good pathways, but you can see the garden giants are constantly digesting all that. So I've created a living compost system in the beds in between my beds where I'm growing fruit and veg. But with permaculture, you have where edge is very important, where 2 environments meet, you have the most amount of activity. So now in my growing field, I've bacterial dominated areas on the bed, and I have mycorrhizal and mycelium dominated areas in the pathways in between. So in bands all across the field, you have the 2 environments constantly mixing, and that improves the benefits of breaking down. These are them growing out into the field. You can see the small button one to the right. That's the one, as it's a mushroom baby, and it grows up and they continue on. But I'll show you a sequence of pictures now in the field. And the real advantage of them is, like I say, they break down the wood chips. They make connections between the plants. They tidy up. If I was harvesting and there was a disease bit of a plant and I drop it on the pathway, the mycelium will come up and they'll digest it down. So there's no possibility of contamination. So you can see as they grow older, they grow up, they start to get eaten. You can see the ones on the left here are quite large, and then they start to break down. It's amazing the amount of biological life that is happening. If you scrape that underneath, the amount of worm activity and everything that's happening, the amount of beetles, the amount of earwigs, it's absolutely fantastic. So what the mushrooms are doing, they're accelerating with the biological breakdown of materials to make them available to your plants. And these are a few more of them. You can see they break down to absolutely nothing. And the mushroom itself can break down in the space of 3 or 4 days. And the mushroom is phenomenal because even though it's only 1 cell wall thick in the mycelium, it's able to fight up all the bacteria and viruses that it meets in the environment every day. It's able to hold that in the mushroom until the spores are released. But once the spores are released, it lets the mushroom decay, and that feeds in back into the system. And you can see another secondary mold has started growing on the mushroom even before it's died. Here are some slugs, loving it. And then in the end, you can, with the garden giant, you can turn around and pick the younger ones and eat them. You wouldn't need too many of them because they require an enzyme that's in your stomach to digest. And if you eat too many of them in a week, like most people do when they get excited and the whole place is burst with the garden giant mushrooms, they eat too many of them and it depletes the enzyme, and then you can get nauseous after eating them. So my primary role for having the garden giant in my farm is as a digester and to help break down materials and help the general environment and stuff feed together. And again, it's all about the eating. And like I say, garden giants, you can eat them. You wouldn't eat a lot of them, but there are other mushrooms like shiitake and like oyster mushroom that are like the garden giant. They don't need very, very good environments, sterile environments to grow them. And they're the kind of mushrooms we can incorporate into our farming systems. Not that you have a big sterile shed in the corner, but you have logs and areas with the different mushrooms that are growing. They're adding to the environment, but then also at particular times of year you can harvest them. And for small scale growers and small scale producers, when you're supplying direct to your customers, well then it's brilliant, because a couple of times a year you can go out and harvest the mushrooms, and it's an extra crop that you can have with it. And again, with Manna Organic Farm, that's what we do. We grow mushrooms and we try and add the stuff in. I have another small video here. So mushrooms are phenomenal. Paul Stamets is phenomenal. This is just one other thing he's doing. Paul discovered years ago that we have bee colony collapse disorder. And that's happening because the bees are challenged because of all of these external contaminants from pollutants, but also from a destruction of their environment. But it turns out bees evolved inside in woodlands with their hives inside in trees, and they had symbiotic relationships with mushrooms. Their relationship is so deeply connected that there's a part of the bee's DNA that's only activated by consuming the mycelium in mushrooms. And now, because we've cut most of the trees and we don't have the mushrooms growing in the fields, and then have all the extra toxins, not only are the bees trying to deal with those pollutants, they don't have their DNA or their immune system properly activated because they don't have access to the mycelium. So what Paul Stamets has done is he's taken three mushrooms and taken the mycelium and solved the problem of bee collapse and extended the working life. I'll share a short video here and then we can have a chat.
Deforestation is causing zoonotic diseases to spread. When there is a loss of foraging bees, the population declines, mites and other diseases then begin to spiral out of control, and suddenly the whole colony collapses. I want to bring to you an epiphany that I've had that I think is just truly revolutionary. That the same mushrooms that can limit bird flu, H5N1, herpes, also positively affect bees and being able for them to control the viral burden and reduce them. So we started doing experiments with bees. They're given extracts of the mycelium, of myco honey. As myco honey increases, there's a radical decline in the viral pathogen payload. They can upregulate their immune system, give them a host defense antiviral shield, allow them to detoxify toxins, and allow them to be better pollinators. Dr. Steve Shepard, who I'm working with, as an entomologist of 39 years of experience studying bees, I'm unaware of any reports that extend the life of worker bees more than this. We are suffering a collapse of our ecosystems, but we can do something about this. I want to call out to all of you as citizen scientists to join in a mycological revolution, to be able to go out and help wild bees as well as the honeybee, and to be able to engage in permaculture practices to return carbon back into the soil, to build the mycelial networks, because we are far more interconnected with mycelium nature than we even have a glimpse of being possible.
Okay, that's Paul Stamets and mushrooms, and a very good, just an introduction. Like the man blew my mind when I met him and when I started reading about him a good few years ago. But we literally are only scratching the surface into what the potential mushrooms can add to our farms. And if we're looking at building food sovereignty around the country, making ourselves more independent, less dependent on oils, transitioning away from all the chemical inputs, and then rehabilitating the land from the damage we've caused, mushrooms can be a fantastic tool in that, along with many other ones.
Yeah, fascinating. What was that again? Mycelium revolution?
Mycelium running, yeah, a mycelial revolution. Yeah, bee mushroomed.
Because yeah, the mushrooms, certainly any beekeeper would like to know that about the mushroom to extend the colony. That would be very good information.
Yeah, well, he created a worldwide patent, and then he made the patent free for use worldwide. So at the moment, there's several universities researching it, and it's not available for sale at the moment, but it will be fairly soon. But what Paul does is everything is openware or shareware. So the knowledge he gathers, he's trying to share out with the worldwide community.
That's great. Well, that's great, Thomas. Thanks very much for that. I think if any questions come in, we can answer them on Twitter. So we'll be on Twitter. You'll be on Twitter all day on Saturday, 10:20. And anyone who has questions about mushrooms, direct them to Talamh Beo's Twitter page. And yeah, so thanks very much for that. And you're one of the green growers. There's only 300 growers in Ireland. I think that's quite shocking that you're one of
scale
300.
horticulture. Yeah. But our food system isn't based around food sovereignty. It's based about commodities and export. So essentially all we have is dairy and beef, which are commodities and export. And there's very little support for any of the rest of it. There's only 1% of farmers that grow their own vegetables, and even most farmers in the country, as farmers, most of us, well, we do, but most farmers don't even consume the food they produce. So somebody could be raising beef or milking cows, but they'd still sell that as a commodity, get money for it, end up buying their beef or buying their milk from somewhere else down the road. So we need to reconnect with our foods as a community, but we need to do it as farmers ourselves. So in order to be part of the land we live in, we should be growing and eating the food, especially as farmers off the land. And to be a community embedded in a culture or a community, well, then that food needs to be coming from the community. And for a country that had such issues over the years with famine and food shortages, it's a shame now when we have so much knowledge available to us and so many tools that we can do something about it, that we'd let it slip back there again. So food sovereignty is extremely important. People and food. People, food, community and land.
Thank you, Thomas. And that's one of our first Hedge School of Farming to learn a bit about mushrooms and food sovereignty.
Talamh Beo Hedge School, brilliant.
Yeah, Talamh Beo Hedge School. Everything you wanted to know from Agricultural College. Useful.
But they weren't allowed to tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Breda. We'll catch you in 10:20. It'll be a great day.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Thomas.
Slán.